Crossing over, following God into the unknown. We're teaching through the Old Testament book of Joshua. Today, chapter 6, the famous part. It's this.
Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. Joshua fought the battle of Jericho, and the walls came tumbling down.
Any guesses what tune's going to be stuck in your head for the rest of the day? You're welcome. But if you're familiar with Joshua chapter 6, when you hear Jericho, your mind thinks about one thing: the walls that come tumbling down. Because we remember the dramatic part. I mean, think about it this way. Kids, let me see some hands. How many of you have ever been to a parade? Right? Yeah, right. Most of you. And parades, they can be a lot of fun. Right? There are things like floats, and there are clowns, and there are horses, and there are trucks. And there's also oftentimes candy. When it comes to the candy part, I think that's actually got to be kind of confusing for all of you who are kids, because that's like the only time that you ever hear your parents say, go, run into that street. Somebody just threw a Snickers bar. And maybe parents, when you're coming back, after the parade, and if you ask your kids, well, what was your very favorite part of the parade? They might not say anything about the horses or anything about the floats. They might say something along the lines of, well, it was the guy sitting next to us. He dropped his hot dog. You're like, really, of all the things? Because we have this tendency to notice the dramatic thing, even if it's not the most important thing. We can do the same thing with the Bible. We can all remember and be aware of the walls of Jericho that come tumbling down, but still miss out on what God is trying to teach us through that. Joshua chapter 6, Battle of Jericho. Did you know that the Battle of Jericho doesn't really start in the city of Jericho? It actually starts several chapters before that. The people of Israel, they came across this. Chapter 3, verse 1, early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over the Jordan River. And it wasn't just the Jordan River. This was the Jordan River at flood stage, which means this wasn't just a little creek that you could hop across. This wasn't ankle deep. This was wide. This was deep. This was dangerous. And there was no bridge, and there was no boat, and there was no plan B. Kids, did you know what plan B is? Well, even if you don't, that's okay. You can circle it anyway. Well, before they ever saw the city of Jericho, God told them to do this. Chapter 3, verse 8, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river. Get in there. Get your feet wet. Take a step. God, he provided. Right? He did part that river, but he parted it after they took a step. Because that's how God often prepares his people. He didn't start by changing their circumstances. He started by growing their faith. Are there any challenges? Are there any Jordan rivers in your life today? What if God is more interested in building your trust than in simply making your life easier? Where might be God inviting you to take a step of faith before you know the outcome? Well, fast forward a couple of weeks. Joshua, he's having a little trouble sleeping. He goes on a walk alone, and this happens. Verse 13 in chapter 5. Now, when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Now, if that's me and if that's what I saw, I think I'd be hightailing it back to camp. I mean, approaching, strangers that are armed with weapons. Not my spiritual gift. No thanks. Joshua saw that, and he approached this guy, and he asked this stranger who was armed this question. Verse 13 continues, Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." That's an interesting line, isn't it? If you've ever heard that from the Bible, did you know that that comes right before the Battle of Jericho? You know, everybody wants to enlist God to be on their side. Here's where I'm at. Here's what I want. Here's what I believe. God, he's going to be on my side. He's going to be my ally. That's not this. Verse 13, Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." I think if you know the story, you'd be thinking, well, wasn't he on Israel's side? What? Well, no, he said neither. See, what we get from this is this. The commander of the Lord's army made it very clear that he didn't come to be a lieutenant to assist Joshua. He came as a general to command Joshua. How do you view God in your own life? Because me, I have this tendency to relate to God as God's like, he's my faithful helper. And God, he's someone that guides me and comforts me through difficult and tough times in life. And God, he gets me into heaven. And God does offer to do all of those things, but he is also this. Verse 15, the commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Commander, holy. Does that sound like the kind of person you invite into your life to be your personal assistant? No. See, passages like this in the Bible, well, they remind us of who God is. He loves us. He's approachable. You know, we have an open door relationship with him, but this passage, it also reminds us he is still the King of Kings. He is still the Lord of Lords. He is still the ruler over the entire universe. Does your life reflect that? Am I trying to get God to do my will, or am I truly seeking and open to his? Am I listening? Am I submitting? Am I following? Chapter 6, verse 1. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. See, Jericho was one of the most strategic cities in the region, which means it was also one of the most protected cities in the region. When Joshua and the Israelites approached Jericho, they saw something like this. That's a wall. That's a big one. So how about you? Connect this to your life. Do you have any walls in your life today? Any problem that you're wrestling with, something that just won't go away? Is there an obstacle that is blocking your goal? Any difficulty that feels heavy? What do you do? What do you do when you hit a wall? What do you do when you face a problem? Here's what Joshua did. Chapter 6, verses 3 and 4. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horn in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. Now, you may know about the walls that come tumbling down, but before that happened, there was this. What do you think about this military strategy? Don't miss how bizarre this is. Joshua's plan, here it is. We're going to march around the city. We're going to blow trumpets, and then we're going to leave. And then we're going to come back the next day and do it again. And then we're going to come back the next day and do it again and again and again and again. See, if I were in that strategy planning session, I think I'd have said, Joshua, I really admire your faith, but can we tweak that plan? Might I suggest a battering ram? Or how about a catapult? If nothing else, Joshua, can we at least bring along a few ladders? No. Joshua, this guy stuck with trumpets. Well, what happened? 7 days later, we get this, verse 20. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. So that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. The wall came down. The wall came down. The mighty wall of Jericho came a-tumbling down. It was an act of God. Clearly, that was the only explanation for this. I also want to give you a really fascinating historical note about this. Okay? Here, verse 20. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. For years, prominent archaeologists, they ridiculed Christianity because of this. Joshua chapter 6, they said, you believe that? Really? How can you believe that? How can you be so naive? How can you be so simple-minded? There is no way it happened like that. Walls never fall out. Walls always fall in. Walls fall in because they are attacked from the outside. Archaeology had never found a single wall that fell flat until they uncovered Jericho. Josh Garstang, the director of British School of Archaeology, he excavated Jericho, and he found something so surprising that he and his team, they signed a statement. Here's the statement that they signed, and I quote, "As to the main fact, then, there remains no doubt. The walls fell outwards so completely that the attackers would be able to clamber up and over their ruins into the city." Why so unusual? Because the walls of cities do not fall outwards, they fall inwards. Isn't that cool? It happened exactly the way the Bible says that it happened. What does that mean? That means you can trust this book. Verse 20. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. Now that sounds like a really nice children's song, but I got a question. Do you think that God really needed the trumpets in order to make this wall fall? Do you think he really needed the shouts of the people? Because I don't think that he did. In fact, I don't think God needed Joshua and Israel at all. Look at the role of Joshua and Israel. They didn't even touch that wall. It was God. God was the one who had the power. God, he was the one who was going to provide. So if that was his plan, if he was planning to take those walls down for them without them even touching the walls, then I wonder, why didn't God tumble that wall before they even got there? I think that there's something here that God wants us to discover regarding walls and obstacles in our lives. Quite a few years ago, the exterior of my house needed to be painted. And so Sarah, my wife, she suggested that we hire a professional. I said, well, there's no need to do that because you married one. We can do this. Painting a house, how hard can it be? So we start painting. And 3 hours, we got one of the sides painted. And I'm like, not bad. That was pretty good. We took a little lunch break, go inside. About a half hour into our lunch break, I hear this noise. Boom. Crash. Thunderstorm. I neglected to look at the weather forecast, and it rained hard. After the storm passed, I go outside, and that's when I saw it. Bubbles. Kids, what did I see? Yeah, right. Yep, there are bubbles there. I saw hundreds and thousands of paint bubbles. My house looked like it had the measles. Why did I have this problem? Well, could I blame the rain? Blame it on the rain? Isn't that what Milli Vanilli taught us to do? Some of you, if you're too young to understand that, ask anyone over the age of 45 and they can tell you about the whole scandal. Quite a story. Why did I have the problem that I had? Here's why I had the problem that I had. I had that problem because I was like a world-class bonehead and I didn't even read what was on the can. It clearly was labeled, let dry 12 hours before rain. My problem? My problem was my own bad. Sometimes we say things like, God, why is this happening? Or we say, God, why am I experiencing this? Sometimes the problems we face, sometimes they are the consequence of our own doing. The way of the Lord is clearly labeled, but sometimes I choose to ignore it. Okay, well, doesn't God forgive us? Yes, he certainly does, fully, absolutely, and completely. But forgiveness does not remove all the outcomes. Example, say you lie to a spouse, or you lie to a friend, or you lie to your parents. Will God forgive you? Yeah, God will forgive you. But that relationship is still damaged. It still creates trust issues. Forgiveness doesn't remove all the outcomes. And I know people don't like to hear this, but it's true. Sometimes some of the problems in our life are the result of our own sin, of our own bad, of bubbles on the house because we didn't check the forecast. So as you look at the problems in your life, ask, is that the source of any of them? Because that can be the source of some of them, but not all of them. I mean, think about Daniel. Daniel, this guy, this hero in the Bible, he found himself in a lion's den. Why? Not because he disobeyed God. He was in that lion's den because he obeyed God. Or somebody like Joseph. I mean, he found himself in a prison. Why? Why was he in that prison? Well, he wasn't in that prison because he disobeyed God. He was in that prison because he obeyed God. Same thing going on here with Joshua chapter 6. Joshua and the Israelites, they obeyed God. They were following God, but they still hit that wall. Why? Think about it this way. I know it's only August 2 today, but eventually, right, this is coming. That sad moment when kids go back to school. How do teachers get their students to grow? Well, they don't just give them all the answers, right? They give them tests. They intentionally and deliberately develop problems. And the essential strategy to our entire education system, it revolves around creating problems for students to solve. Why? Because we know how this dynamic works. We know that it is through problems. We know that it is through challenges. We know it is through difficulties that we learn. We know that it is through problems and challenges and difficulties that we grow. That through these difficulties and problems, that is how we are able to demonstrate what we got inside. Don't fear the wall. Learn from the wall. Grow from the wall. Some of the walls are for our good. Got any problems? Got any walls? First thing I'd encourage you to do is to discern what kind of wall is this. Because if it's paint bubbles on your house, well, then that's not a test. That's your bad. And it's time to start following the Maker's directions. But there are other walls. And maybe you're here today and you have marched that march. And you have played the trumpet, but your wall, it still stands. And maybe you're thinking, I know what God did here in Jericho, but why isn't he doing that in my life? God, I did what you asked me to do. God, I trusted you, and God, I obeyed you. So why is this still here? Joshua chapter 6. God's goal is not always to remove the wall as quickly as possible. Sometimes God uses the wall to transform the people who are standing right in front of it. Could God have caused that wall to tumble down before Joshua and Israel even got there? Yes, but he didn't. Why? Because God, he wasn't trying to just give Joshua victory. He was trying to build Joshua into the kind of person that could handle the victory. See, the miracle in Joshua chapter 6, it's not only what happened to that wall, it's also what God was doing in the hearts of the people walking around it. Every single lap they took around that wall of Jericho, it was producing something in them. Trust. Trust. Because if we're honest, walls, they do have a way of revealing what's inside us. They do have a way of revealing things about a wall. It reveals, do I really trust God? Or do I only trust him when he gives me what I want and when I want it? Look at the walls or the obstacles that you're facing today and ask, what is this revealing about me? Look, reflect. Is it revealing a deep trust in God, or is it revealing that your faith depends on God making your life easier? What are you facing today? A difficult relationship? A health concern? A disappointment you didn't see coming? I don't want to spiritualize away pain, saying things like, just have a little bit more faith, and then your wall will come a-tumbling down. Some people use this passage in the Bible that way, but that is not what the Bible teaches. The Bible does not promise that if you follow Jesus, all of your problems are just going to disappear. But it does promise this: God is with you in every battle. And he can use the very walls that you wish he would remove to shape you into the person that he created you to become. Joshua 6, verse 1. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Joshua, his life was not easy. Joshua, he was following God. He was obeying God. But his life, it was challenging. And maybe you can relate to Joshua. What are you facing today? I don't know what wall is in your life, but I do know this. Chapter 5, verse 13, Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied. Read the rest of it with me. "But as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come." Before Joshua ever marched around Jericho, before that wall ever came a tumbling down, before victory came, Joshua encountered the commander of the Lord's army. And the message was simple. Joshua, you are not alone. God is here. And he didn't show up just to be Joshua's personal assistant. He didn't show up just to take Joshua's plan and make it work. He came as the Lord. Am I asking God to bless my plans, or am I surrendering my plans to him? Am I trying to get God to do my will, or am I truly seeking his? Joshua chapter 6, there are walls, there are obstacles, even in the promised land. Following Jesus, it doesn't mean that we're never going to face obstacles and difficulties, but it does mean this: you will never face them alone. God is at work around you. And God is at work in you. And God, he is at work through you. So don't give up. Keep on marching. Keep on listening. Keep on following. Because the God who is able to take those walls of Jericho and make them come tumbling down is the same God that's working in your life today.